Well, for more, let's cross to Doha now and bring in Sultan Barakat. He is the founding director of the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies. Thanks so much for speaking to us. I would like to get your opinion on how strong, particularly, the U.S.-Saudi relationship is, especially under the Trump administration. I start with that because many see that relationship as key to keeping particularly Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, in power. Do you think the Saudi-U.S. relationship at this point can survive Khashoggi's murder intact?
Well, as you know, the Saudi-American relationship really is limited to the very top. It's an elite type of relationship between the political leaders on both sides, and it is largely focused on issues of trade and strategic collaboration in the Middle East. People to people, there is very little in common in terms of values between the people of the United States and Saudi Arabia. And this is why I think for Trump, what happened has come as a nightmare. It is possibly the worst possible time to have that kind of obstacle in the way just before the local elections, the elections in the United States. Now, he would have wanted absolutely nothing to tarnish the image that he's created thousands of jobs as a result of successful business deals with Saudi Arabia. And of course, would have preferred that relationship to be as far away as possible of human rights abuses and any form of scandal. And this is why I think the United States have taken the issue extremely seriously. And this is why Turkey was able to intervene in between. And now, as you saw from the presentation by President Erdogan earlier today, he is trying his very best to exploit the opportunity to the benefit of Turkey from both Saudi Arabia and the United States.
Okay, so let me get your take on the investigation itself. Do you think it's being carried out professionally and thoroughly, and even more importantly, do you think the perpetrators will be brought to justice?
Well, my thought on this is the following. I believe that the Turkish authority have been tapping the consulate for some time. I think they've had access to information from day one, which they then made available to the Americans, and this is how the Americans were able to convince the Saudis to admit to the fact that there's been a murder in the consulate. Otherwise, the arrangement that Saudis have pre-planned, including the use of a double body, another person to pretend to be Khashoggi, to have left the embassy, the consulate, etc. Somehow it could have floated as a potential possibility, but that has been brought to an abrupt end by the Turks, I suspect, pointing out that they do have a recording, and these are the leaks that we have been hearing for the last couple of weeks. It is very clear now to everyone that Mr. Erdogan presented absolutely nothing new today. He has just reiterated the position, the leaks that have been put out there, and he's holding more. And for him to be able to make a real value of that information, Turkey has now got to own up to the fact that they have been tapping or have infiltrated the consulate. And of course, in the diplomatic world we live in the Middle East, this is not very surprising to a lot of people, given the various crises that are going on, the war in Syria, the flow of cash through Istanbul to Syria, and the various supports that's coming from Saudis and Americans to the Kurds who are working against the state in Turkey. So you'd expect that everyone is keeping an eye on everyone else. And it was just a coincidence that they happened to know exactly what's happened in that consulate, and now we are living the result of that leak.
Let me just ask you about that, because it is interesting. It's kind of a reality of our world today. Everyone seems to know that everyone is being spied on somehow. So it almost adds to the sloppiness of the Saudis' execution of this crime, in that if it was committed inside the consulate, we know something happened inside there. Wouldn't it have only been logical to think that they were being spied on in the meantime?
Well, I think this comes down to the Saudis. And it's very unfortunate that in the current administration, the way it has come to power so abruptly and the way it praised itself on the fact that it brought in youth, which obviously equates to no experience. What it did really, it just gathered the worst of arrogance and ignorance in one form of new politics that is coming in the Middle East. And that is really why they would have made such a remarkable mistake of assuming that a murder or even an investigation of that sort could take place outside Saudi Arabia and go unnoticed. The choice of Turkey may have been driven by the fact that Turkey has its own problems in terms of admitting, as you know, to the imprisonment of some journalists and others, and therefore the international community would take their claim with a pinch of salt. But I think it has backfired a big way. The fact that the Turks have been eardropping on the consulate for some time has brought it all out in the open. And if anything, from a Turkish perspective, and I suspect this is what Mr. Erdogan is trying to do by inviting them to bring the 18 accused people into Turkey for trial, he would want to remain very much at the center of this crisis and to extend it and prolong it as much as possible, because from his perspective, it is yielding very good results, particularly in relation to the relationship with the United States. He's been able to speak to President Trump directly. Clearly, deals are being cut at the moment. And as you noticed from Istanbul, the lira is doing rather nicely at the moment. It is recovering. And Turkey is assuming, again, its place in regional international relations.
Okay, Sultan Barakat, we will leave it there. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.